The thing from another world. This is the spot where it was first seen, and these are the first people who saw the thing. How did it get here? Where did it come from? What is it? Is it human or inhuman? Earthly or unearthly? Baffling questions, astounding questions that not even the world's greatest scientific minds can answer.
Welcome to Glowburn, a podcast dedicated to the Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game.
You're no hero. You're a wasteland wanderer, a mutant, a seeker, a robot killer, a stoic shaman guarding forgotten ancient sciences. You seek triumph in technology, winning it with mutations and magic, soaked in the radiation and quantum fields of the altered, the savage, the semi-sentient, and the artificially intelligent.
Welcome to Glowburn, a podcast about the Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game and old-school post-apocalyptic adventuring. I'm Judge Forrest.
And I'm Judge James.
And on tonight's episode, Judge James and I and you, the Glowburn community, share our first impressions and questions about the newly released PDF of the Mutant Crawl Classics core rulebook. But first, let's take a trip down in the shelter.
Down in the shelter.
Welcome to Down in the Shelter. This is the part of our show where we talk about our week in gaming, what we've done with Mutant Crawl Classics or Dungeon Crawl Classics or anything else we're playing or watching that might have something to do with the post-apocalypse. And before we begin, I need to apologize to all of you listeners of Glowburn. I was listening back to our episode of the fantasy post-apocalypse where I was discussing the Ralph Bakshi movie Wizards, and I sort of came at it at a point that, or from a direction that I had no idea who he was, but since then, actually in just the last few days, I realized that I have indeed seen a Ralph Bakshi movie, and I enjoyed it before Wizards, which I didn't enjoy, and the movie was Cool World.
Cool World? No, I have not seen that.
So before we started, Judge Forrest said he was pretty sure he knew what I was going to be talking about.
I thought you were going to bring out Fire and Ice.
No, I've never seen Fire and Ice. I've seen Cool World with Gabriel Byrne and Brad Pitt. Do you know what that movie is?
Wow, no, I don't.
So I would say Cool World is the more mature version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And it was a movie where there was an artist, a cartoonist in prison, and he became like famous for his cartoon work in prison, and he drew this cartoon world, and he especially drew this single character that was a female, and in the movie it was played by Kim Basinger. And I think her name was Holly.
Okay.
And Holly was he drew her, and he goes into her world, he meets her, and then she wants to leave the toon world and become real. And that is the movie, and Brad Pitt's in it, and he's a normal person, and he's, I think they call the normal people noids, and he's a cop in the toon world. And it has to do with, like, can the toons, what can they do in the real world, and what's the risk of them being real, and, you know, it was just I thought it was a really good movie, but it was definitely mature.
Sure.
There's a sex scene in that movie. It's not, like, graphic, but it's funny because it's showing the scene between Gabriel Byrne and the character of Holly, who's a cartoon, and they're about to hang out, And while they're doing this, you're flashing to other scenes with like a cartoon bunny covering her cartoon bunny children's eyes and all sorts of weird stuff that's happening at the same time. Because the idea is like you can't have that kind of interaction between a cartoon character and a human, and it's bad things will happen. So that was a Ralph Bakshi movie that I saw and enjoyed. That was around, I think, 1990, 1991, 92.
92, it looks like.
There you go.
Yeah,
Cool
I'm looking at a page on it. That looks interesting.
I thought it was a pretty good movie, and where I was flipping through Wizards again just to bring this out. Not to say I really enjoyed it. I didn't not enjoy it as much. I'm trying to say how I say this. I can appreciate it more now, and I remember you saying how the art had the rotoscoping because they ran out of money.
Yes.
And I think that some of the jarring factors, like the rotoscoping, threw it off for me. And with Cool World, it was a pretty seamless. He must have had a higher budget. It was a pretty seamless transition. I liked the transition from the toon to the real. And I love, one of my favorite movies of all time is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And this was more of almost a realistic take on it while being a toon movie. I don't know. You should watch it. You should definitely watch it.
I'll have to take a look at it. And I think by that point, Bakshi was probably raking in some royalties from Fritz the Cat, and he did Lord of the Rings. He's probably starting to get royalties off of that, and Wizards, of course. Interesting.
So there's my take, but sorry to throw that down the shelter here. So, Forrest, what have you been doing in gaming lately?
Okay, well, actually just last night in my AD&D campaign, the party found Tensor, the famous wizard of Greyhawk, and had to murder him at his own request. It's a kind of a long story. If you read James Malazluski's The Cursed Chateau, you'll know why it had to happen that way. But now, as a result of that, we have Mordenkainen, the greatest wizard ever, is dead. Tensor, who was one of his Circle of Eight, is dead. Ayuz, who's one of the big bad guys, is on the rise, and Vecna is waving a bony lich hand from the grave, and the party is really eyeball deep in the middle of it all, and I couldn't be happier. I'm actually turning over the DMing job to my co-DM, so I'll be able to be a player again for a while, which is kind of a nice change, actually. As far as MCC goes, I also ran my MCC campaign this last week. We were playtesting elements of my Killer of Giants adventure that I'm writing for Crawling Under a Broken Moon, but we wanted to use the MCC rules since we now have them, and it was a blast. We wanted to take a shot at some higher level character creation for MCC and test the relative power of the baddies in Killer of Giants. And overall, I think I've got the level of the challenge about right, but really, what do I care about balance, really?
Not in this game.
No. Case in point, our session ended in a fiery conflagration with fire alarms screaming in a military commissary after a 40-foot-long three-eyed mutant snake simultaneously attacked the party and a group of well-armed mutant foxes, and it became kind of a three-way death fest. And this was one of, oh good grief, 20-ish encounters in my module there. So anyway, a lot of fun and a lot of mayhem, which was always fun. And speaking of which, I am nearly done with the first handwritten draft of Killer of Giants. The next step is to type it up and edit it as I go. That's how I write. I write by hand always first, then I type. And my good friend Tom Guile, who some people know from Google+, has taken my ugly, disgusting, amorphous maps and prettied them up, and they are stunning. They are beautiful. So, I mean, as beautiful as a post-apocalyptic map can be. But really looking forward to seeing the full results of that. What he's sent me so far is just mind-blowingly good. So anyway,
you write by hand, like with a pen or pencil?
A pen and a composition book. That's how I wrote my novel. That's how I write my short stories. That's how I write my adventures.
You wrote a novel by hand?
Yes.
How does that autocorrect? Like, how do you take care of the spell check? There's
this thing called grammar that you have to learn, and spelling. It's another thing. Young people might not understand.
No. I
don't know if I have the time to explain really, but
do you write in that manner in which all the letters like cursively connect together?
Oh, my handwriting is atrocious. That's half the problem when I go back to type it in is I have to try to recognize my own handwriting. So I just spill my ideas on the page quicker.
I can't do it. My handwriting has gotten so bad that I mean it's nearly illegible. I actually keep an old school like Franklin Covey rule, like little binder for my day-to-day stuff. But I at least once a week I will read a note that I made from the prior week and not know what I wrote.
Yeah, cast comprehend languages, right?
Yeah, I wish I had that spell, but I don't.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, what have you been doing this last little while, James?
So I've actually had a busy weekend and week of gaming and vlogging. A few folks might know I'm doing this thing on my Living for Crits YouTube channel where I'm taking and week by week doing a journey. It's a 7-part series called the OS Rebellion. And it's a 7-part series of me discussing how I came across Dungeon Crawl Classics and my quest through that whole process. I don't know why I'm doing it. I just felt like I get asked a lot about why I play these kinds of games, and I thought I'd take that like a retrospective journey through that process.
That's very cool.
So and some folks interact with me every week, so I think I just like hearing myself talk. So that's been the last several weeks I've been doing that. On Friday, I ran Harley Stroh's 7th Pit of Cesricon, which is out of the 2015 Goodman Games World, it's the program guide. I ran that as a tournament funnel with a Norman Game Night. We had 13 or 14 players. At one point, we had sucked the entire club was standing around watching the game.
Wow.
And we used kind of a fun mechanic to help vacate seats. In the original adventure, there are these punch-out tokens, and each player takes a different color token. And then when certain magics are cast in the game, the judge draws from a token pool, and if he draws that color, everyone with that token dies. And that's how they clear the seats quickly in the tournament.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't have colorful tokens, so what I did was I took 6 totems. I had a big giant Orcus miniature from D&D, Blue Dragon miniature from D&D, a giant rat skeleton from Halloween with a Dungeon Crawl Classics like medallion around its neck.
Yep.
I bought a skull a few years ago, last year, for Halloween, and I put eyeballs in it and made it Morty from Planescape Torment. And then I had a Big Daddy from BioShock and a Songbird from BioShock, both in those Pop Funkos. And I put all 6 of those across from all 6 seats. And when those magics were cast that would require a token to be pulled, I would roll a die, and the player with that totem died. But I also killed players if they touched the totem. I also killed players if they interacted with the totem, but the totem would do it. Like, so I'd have the totem would appear in the game and do those things. So
excellent.
Typically this is a pretty family-friendly club, but the scene where the PCs witness a giant hammering the souls of the damned into a sword pushed that boundary a little bit.
It would, yeah.
On Sunday, I ran my Nothing's Free and Ocean World adventure again, which is my second time with enjoying the Dolphin Inquisition. There was a big epic scene at the end of this adventure where the Disney Liberty paddle boat, whatever it was, emerges from beneath the waves with Manatina Turner on the bow. A Manatee Tina Turner, clutching a lightsaber artifact, belting out Private Dancer.
Oh, God.
I think it was the first time that's ever happened at our local game club.
I hope it's the last time.
And then finally, my wife and I are starting our own, just the two of us, dystopian post-apocalyptic book club.
That's cool.
This past week, it didn't take us long. We watched through the entirety of Hulu's The Handmaid's Tale, and which takes place in a dystopian United States where the apocalypse in this TV show, not too much of a spoiler, is similar to Children of Men, in which the birth rate has just plummeted. And the people of this hyper-religious United States that's taken over, and they've decided that they will forcefully have those that are fertile be impregnated. And Elizabeth Moss plays the lead character, and she's one of these handmaids that's forced into this. So we watched the TV show, we loved it, and I bought the book for us to read. And I also bought Ready Player One, which I've never read, just because I saw the trailer for it, and I'm like, I better read this before the movie comes out, and so.
I still haven't seen the trailer for that.
The trailer looks really... Have you read the book?
Yeah.
Is the book decent?
Yeah, it actually is. Well, it's decent. Well, I'm a child of the 80s, so that does play into it.
Okay, well, so, I mean, I sort of am too, kind of. You weren't a child in the 80s. You were like...
I was a teenager.
A teenager. It's different.
Well, yeah, maybe that's what you needed to be as a teenager. Just read it. I'm curious to know what you think.
We're both going to read both books, and then I will report back.
All right.
Maybe for that section, I'll have her report back. I'll bring
That'd be
her on
awesome.
Mike,
On voice.
on voice.
Sounds great.
Speaking of voices, let's go over to Voices of the Ancient Ones.
All right.
Voices of the Ancient Ones.
Welcome to the Voices of the Ancient Ones. This is where you contact us on social media, and we read your communications from Glowburn headquarters. So, James, you want to take the first one there?
I love the idea of Glowburn headquarters, like we're sitting here in an actual bunker somewhere, preparing for the end.
Yes, yep, brooding.
It's exactly what's happening. So if that's what you're envisioning in your head right now, it's true. And if you're not, you should be. All right, so our first Voice of the Ancient Ones comes from John Potts, and this is from Google+. There is a lot of love about the MCC rulebook. I love the classes, the mutations, the patron AIs, and the archaic alignments. The only real question I have is about wetware for shamans. The level chart states max wetware levels go up to 5, but the only wetware in the book is the patron AI wetware, and they go up to level 3. It's not clear on whether we are expected to create higher level wetware or maybe port over spells from DCC. I'm fine with doing that. I just don't think the experience is communicated. So thank you, John. It's a great question. I know on our last episode, and because of the way time dilation works, since we're traveling at the speed of light through the airwaves, there might be some disconnect on what's being communicated from Goodman Games and Judge Jim Wampler and what we're saying here on the show. But I'm going to imagine in the future there'll be more information about this somehow, and I think there'll be some more clarity. However, if that clarity is not as clear as expected, I think this is a sort of a wait and see aspect. This is one of those places where the intention, I believe, in the original rules was that for the GM to create some. There probably was some idea of sharing from other DCC books for the spells, for instance, that are wetware, and to use those and port those over and reskin them. And then, again, there's already, I think, one third party. It's one so far, right? Third party
Yes.
license that's been released.
Yes.
So I know that some of the questions I've received off the air and sort of through private messages and such is about this question and what do you do if you went in on Mutant Crawl Classics and don't have DCC because they're not connected? I have a cheat. Not sure if it's the best cheat, but it is a cheat. So there is a website called purplesorcerer.com. And under purplesorcerer.com, if you happen to go over there and just take a look at all of the cool tools that they have available for you on that site, there under tools, there is something called the Sorcerer's Grimoire. And what you can do with the Sorcerer's Grimoire is you can actually generate spells for either wizard or cleric. And when you go and select the spells, it actually spits out the entire spell essentially for you. So I just did a quick click and I got Chill Touch, and it says everything about Chill Touch, a first level spell. So if you happen to be one of those people who just got MCC and aren't back and don't have anything with Dungeon Crawl Classics, but want some access to DCC spells, but maybe you don't have the DCC core book, which you should have the DCC core book, but if you don't, that's okay. We love you too. You can go over to purplesorcerer.com, and this is sort of a backdoor way, a completely legal backdoor way to get access to some of these spells, which I think will easily port over as patron AI wetware with just a little bit of reskinning and seeing what matches up to which patron.
I'm going to go out on a speculative limb here, a very thin speculative limb. When we had Judge Jim on the show last time, I asked him specifically about were there tech level 5 things out there, because they're only go up to tech level 4 or no. Yeah, was there a mysterious tech level 5? And he said, yes, there is, but that would be shown in some of the further adventures that were coming out. And I'm wondering if that's the same here, if we're going to see wetware levels 4 and 5 in some of the upcoming adventures. I don't know that either way, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, well, John, thank you so much for your question.
All right, our next Voice of the Ancient Ones comes via Facebook from Troy Tucker. And Troy has lots of questions. I'm just going to read them here, and then we'll take them one by one. Can you ever really trust a plantient? Is the, quote, green scare that is sweeping across the world something I should be worried about? Or are these rumors just to make us afraid of our plantient cousins? Why do they call them sunflowers? Zeeth is the scariest monster in Gamma World. Discuss. Perhaps episodes where you discuss, compare, and contrast the different classes to those found in DCC. Okay.
What a good idea.
Let's go one by one. Can you ever really trust a Plantient? Now, what I've found is I've had a couple of players play Plantients, and I've seen them played in con games. And there's something about playing a Plantient, I don't know what it is, where people feel like they are inferior or going to be the butt of all the jokes at the table. And usually they are, because, I don't know, it's easy. So I think that the Plantients are probably plotting against us, but they're humble just by the nature of being a Plantient, so you don't have to worry too much about it. The green scare, those are definitely just rumors to make us afraid of our Plantient cousins who we should love and hug. And why do they call them sunflowers? I have no idea. Now, Zeeth is the scariest monster in Gamma World discussed. That is true. Zeeth is the scariest monster in Gamma World. Do you know what Zeeth is, James?
I have no idea.
Okay, all right. So Zeeth is a notorious beast, I guess, from the Gamma World First Edition bestiary. It's a purple grass. Looks innocuous until you get close, and what it does is it actually teleports its seeds inside you.
Ew.
And
Ew.
you can just go from there. And I've used this to great effect in some of my players before, or some of my characters. And actually, I think I recall one of my previous times where I was discussing MCC. I had one encounter where my players all very narrowly avoided a patch of Zeeth grass, or they kept making their saves, or it wasn't hitting or something. I can't remember exactly, but somehow they walked through a patch of Zeeth grass and made it out alive, which frankly is not supposed to happen. Zeeth is definitely the scariest monster in Gamma World and possibly the universe.
I want to back up into his question.
Yeah.
Why do they call them sunflowers?
Yeah, why?
Here's my take on sunflowers. Now, my 7-year-old son, Cooper, is a huge fan of Plants vs. Zombies. And one of the first things in that game you generate are your sunflowers to help generate sun. And the reason they're called sunflowers is because they are the brilliant light to guard against the oncoming post-apocalyptic swarm of irradiated zombies. And they are there to stand as a bastion against those.
I see.
You know, I haven't had the same experience of Plantients being the butt of the jokes in my files.
Really?
No.
Oh boy.
No, it hasn't happened that way. And I think I've run 5 or 6 funnels with MCC, with Plantients in all of them. And
you never had that?
I've never had them be a joke. I've had the Manimals be a joke. And I don't know what it has to do with it, but we've sort of role-played out some of the advantages a Plantient might have. Like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but like sometimes they've gone, I've run 3 now adventures where it's involved underwater questing. My Nothing's Free in Ocean World adventure requires a lot of underwater swimming. And in all of those, there have been advantages to being a Plantient. They're more buoyant. I allowed them to be more buoyant, and they've been, floating life rafts for characters. They've had some uses that the other players have engaged them with. It sort of made them the unsung heroes, or maybe the sung heroes of our adventures. So I love Troy's take. I think Troy was posting right before MCC was getting released a countdown that the Plantients were going to do something terrible to someone if the game didn't release. So I think I'm inspired by Troy's post here that I will be writing an adventure maybe called "And the Plantients Have Absconded with Troy Tucker," featuring Troy Tucker.
I like it.
So we have...
Or was featuring Troy Tucker.
Was featuring Troy Tucker. So Troy, you may end up in one of my adventures as an NPC, and you've been warned.
Now, I'll have to admit that my first MCC character was a mutant banana tree. And that was in the museum event at the end of time. It was awesome. And the cool thing is, so I packed food for cons because I get hungry,
Me too.
And I had packed a banana.
Wait, you didn't know though, right? You didn't know you were going to get a banana.
No, I had no idea. It was random. It was
it.
totally. I mean, we didn't even see the sheets. We just grabbed them randomly. And I looked, I was like, oh, mutant banana. So I put my banana on the table. I said, well, there's my figure.
Awesome. I'm going to keep digging into the mailbag here. All right. Oh, this one is from someone very familiar. Greetings, burners of the glow. I wanted to lend my voice to those praising the Mutant Crawl Classics RPG. I applaud Jim Wampler for his vision and ability to create a game that meshes so well DCC RPG. I really see these as complete interchangeable parts of a bigger gaming universe. My 3 favorite things about MCC so far are the way the classes are balanced, similar to DCC. Each has a role to play and has value. The art is simply amazing and evocative of the genre. Definitely. I added the definitely there. I love the many homage items in the book, such as plasma swords from Thundar, Bitemon from Tron, and the mutant on page 99, which harkens back to the original art from the Gamma World rulebook. I know that the print book was delayed due to erratic corrections, but I think the final product will be worth it. In the future, I would love to see some rules for converting from first edition Metamorphosis Alpha to MCC, maybe as an entry in a future Gen Con program guide, or the elusive Goodman Games Annual. Thanks, and keep on burning, DM Kojo. Well, thank you, Kojo, for another awesome mailbag item here. You know, I'm on board, and I think, Forrest, you are too, with a lot of what you've mentioned so far, and I think what's cool about tonight's show is we're going to go into several of these tonight, of what you're mentioning. Discussing the Metamorphosis Alpha section, I'm actually seriously considering making my big Metamorphosis Alpha purchase at Gen Con, just because the concept is really growing on me. I don't have anything for it. I think I mentioned before, I had the Amazing Engine book, and I can't believe I sold it several years back. I don't know. I probably sold it for next to nothing in a yard sale, actually, which makes me feel even more terrible about it. Yeah, it was just one of those things like, I'm never going to play this. Why would I play this? Flipping through the reprint, because I had a chance to play Metamorphosis Alpha, and I forgot to mention this. This is back in April or May. I GM games here locally with Mike Bolam, who is also a road crew judge, runs lots of DCC events over at our friendly local game store. And I had asked if he would run Metamorphosis Alpha so I could play. This is back when, Forrest and I were discussing Tweaky, just so I could play a robot. And while I wasn't Tweaky, I did happen to play a character named Buck, who had a robot companion named Tweaky. So it worked out well. And great adventure. In the end, we discovered a self-aware tank. So that was kind of cool. And I found interesting about Metamorphosis Alpha was, even though walking into the game, and this could be because Mike's a good GM, we're playing the game as we're wanderers in a hex crawl, and we're finding a river, or we're in a jungle or a forest, and we're traveling the river. Even though I knew the backstory of Metamorphosis Alpha being something where we are in a starship, I would forget. I'd find myself forgetting during the game where this was not just a typical fantasy setting or a typical post-apocalyptic setting. We were on a starship. And I really am very interested in that concept now, because I think that that'd be so much fun to run, especially with Mutant Crawl Classics. I have to admit, and I mean no respect to Jim Ward, I have a hard time with the charts and tables in the game from a glance. So as a player, I had no problem with it at all, because Mike was coming up with all the rules and making the rulings. But I think GMing it might be tough. But that's a game I could see as being a very easy on-the-fly conversion, just from flipping through the rulebook, with very little needed to be set in stone. So, right,
I'd agree. I think you need to look at the scaling, especially on things like damage, hit points, and so on and so forth. But other than that, yeah, that's a kind of a no-brainer.
All right, well, DM Kojo, thank you again for the email. I hope we don't disappoint you on the rest of the show tonight. What else we got?
All right, from John Rigdon, an email that came to our Glowburn podcast at gmail.com address, hint. John says, I would like to hear about your take on the mutations from the TSR days to the ones in MCC. Also, which ones you'd like to use and how you'd update them from old Gamma World to something that doesn't make my mind implode every time I try to understand it. Oh, also the AIs. Would you run them as your bog standard gods or treat them more like I'm not sure how I would treat them other than gods. Look at me not being creative. P.S. If this was already a topic, then I must confess I haven't been able to listen to as much of Glowburn as I'd like. Really hoping to change that in the coming days. All right, we're really hoping you'll change that too, John.
Hope so, for sure.
But as far as Gamma World converting MTC or MCC, I don't know if I can help you with brain implosions, honestly. We'll be talking a little bit later about the mutations. I really like the variableness of the mutations as opposed to the Gamma World, which is pretty much one standard effect. I think that's one of the very cool things about Goodman games in general, including DCC, is that there's that swinginess factor, or I want to use the word fudge factor, but that's not really what it is. It's just that it scales the way it does. I like that a lot, especially with the mutations. Could you convert the mutations in Gamma World to MCC? Yes, you can. I have made the attempt with a couple of them. It is not as easy as you might think, because the question is, with the Gamma World mutation, is that effect the middle of the road for the possible effects of that mutation, or is it the top end, or is it the bottom end? And you have to make a decision based on your own good judgment as to where the Gamma World fits in the sliding scale of power in regards to that mutation. Does that make sense, James?
It does, yeah.
For sure. Making sense, yeah. So it's kind of hard for me to gauge that. You have to do that, I think, really for your own campaign. Depends on how mean of a judge you want to be. AIs, yes, I would treat them as gods. However, depending on the AI, I mean, you can have a maser pistol that has an AI in it, in which case I would run it as like a kind of a demigod or a minor god or something like that. Complete with all the quirks that you would find in any Greek god. Just go read a good book of Greek mythology and you'll know exactly what I mean. So yes, they can be run as gods, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily omnipotent and omniscient, etc., etc., etc. I think that's hit everything. I think I hand-waved that answer pretty good there. Anyway, we enjoy hearing from you. We'd like to hear more from you, from the community, especially as the rules are available to you. I'm sure there will be more and more questions, and we will give our slightly informed answers whenever possible.
The Great Disaster.
Go, 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 go!
Okay, folks, it's time for the Great Disaster. And on this episode of Glowburn, we'll be discussing first impressions and then first questions that we have as Judge Forrest and I really start to dig in and go through the majesty that is the Mutant Crawl Classics role-playing game rulebook. I do want to point out that because of how much we want to talk about this and how much material we just came up with, even on an overview of this, we're only going to be covering essentially the introduction through Chapter 5 on tonight's Glowburn. So you're going to have to tune in at a future episode to find out what we think and our thoughts on 6 and beyond. Let's start with the introduction of the book. And I want to start with a piece of art that I may have discussed it very briefly last show. I can't remember at this point. But it's the Peter Mullen art that is on page 5. And it's one of those pieces of art in this book. And I think that earlier DM Kojo mentions that art is a positive. I know that a lot of folks have come to Mutant Crawl Classics, and this is their first experience with a Goodman Games role-playing game. And for many, it's their first experience with an old-school style game whatsoever. Maybe they've never played Dungeon Crawl Classics before. Maybe they've never played a post-apocalyptic game before. They're walking into this, and they came from Pathfinder or D&D 5e, and they thought, this sounds like a cool idea. Everything cool that you're about to find out in this book, I believe you are going to find on page 5. I think that you could actually run the game potentially from page 5. What you have on page 5 is you have a pure strain human, a mutant, a manimal, and a plantient charging through a wall that says like MCC RPG, but the letters are made out of floor tiles and, artifacts and a centipede and a slug and a dinosaur centipede insect creature. And the manimal has a stone axe, and the pure strength human has a spear, and yet the mutant is controlling an artifact globe that's in the middle of the sea for the for MCC. I just felt like this art. I love this piece because it's everything you're going to be getting into in this game. And I might say this again later, but this is a game to be savored, and it's a book to be savored and poured over. It's not going to be a book that you can just flip through quickly and you know everything about the game. You'll be able to play the game quickly, but I think that readers will be finding out things about this game as they play and as they read through it, something new every time they play. And for me, this art is that. I see something different in this art whenever I flip through it and just look at this.
Yeah,
piece.
I do too. I just noticed under the middle C in MCC, there's that pair of eyes and a clawed hand reaching out from under that. I had not seen that before.
So cool.
Never seen that before.
I love it.
Yeah, there's your adventure right there, right underneath the sea.
Yep.
Wow. Moving on, boy, we could go about about the art all day long. Yeah, we'll need to think about that for a future episode too.
For sure.
I really adore the art in here. I think it's fantastic. But moving down into the actual past the forward and the preface. Sorry, Jim and Jim. I really liked the section on the setting, and in particular the talk about the climate and the ecology of the area, because it sets a certain mood. It's really kind of how do I want to put this? Well, I mean, it's a good solid setting. I thought it was very vividly described. One thing I would love to see, and maybe one of our listeners is feeling the gumption to do this, I would love to see a weather generator, because that is talked about and seems to play a big part in the setting itself. I'd like to see a weather generator complete with glow storms and meteor showers.
Ooh, that'd be nice.
And the environment really should be a quote-unquote monster in a post-apocalyptic setting. And not just because of radiation zones. I don't know if you've ever heard the term green hell. You ever heard that term?
I have not, no.
It was a term used in the Vietnam War for people who were, or actually may have come from before then, describing the jungles.
Ooh, okay.
And how you go in the jungles and it's green and beautiful, but it's hell because of all the nasties in there, snakes and bugs and such that like to eat you. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of Terra AD is it's kind of a worldwide green hell. And so anyway, I think the environment really should be a monster in there.
I'm going to take the idea of a generator a little further, and I would love to see a third-party publisher, and I'm too lazy to do this, but I'd love to see another third-party publisher do maybe a complete apocalypse generator where you have your base Terra AD, but for the judges' purposes, something that would allow you to real quick and on the fly come up with some terrible things that have happened to the world over the last 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 years. Just almost, I think it'd be a great tool to help with that campaign creation early on, just to populate the world a little bit. So I'd love to see that. So whoever wants to do that, tag, you're it.
Yeah, so populate your world and then depopulate it.
Absolutely.
So Chapter 1, Character Creation. As I was saying earlier in Down in the Shelter, I took the opportunity this last session to generate some higher level, third level characters is what we were going for. And I have to admit, we found character generation to be pretty quick. And I was playing with a few people who were somewhat familiar with Dungeon Crawl Classics, Mutant Crawl Classics, one who had never even touched the system. And again, we really found it to be awfully easy to create characters. There's some nice flavor that allows the players to get into character really quickly. Give you, for instance, one of the guys that actually he had played previously before, but he rolled up a mutant, and his mutant's appearance role was hair drips oil. And so every time as we were going through and doing the adventure, every time
what kind of oil was it?
We didn't really, it was kind of undifferentiated oil. Yeah, I was asked, was it flammable? I was like, yeah, sure, it's flammable.
Yeah, why not?
Don't light your own head on fire, though.
Go for it.
But everywhere we went, or the party went, he said that he would his character would rub his hair on whatever it was. If he found something interesting, he would, especially if it was like a feature of an ancient building or something like that, he would rub his hair on it. And I asked, what the heck are you doing after a while? It's like, this is weird. And he says, oh, I'm marking my territory.
Ew.
And I thought, well, yeah, it's gross, but it's kind of cool, too.
No, I'm cool with it. I'm just, ew.
It's like he instantly jumped into this character using this silly mutation that probably has no other purpose except to gross you out.
Yep.
Anyway, I really like that. Again, it's slick, it's quick. Yes, I'm familiar with it, but really, if you just go down the charts, go down the list, it's pretty self-explanatory.
I really love the idea of the hopeless character.
Yes.
I think the fact that you are weeding out 1 hit point characters from 0 level generation is a good thing. Not that I have a problem with them in my DCC games. I do find that most 1 hit point characters are used as fodder, and they don't make it very far in the games. And since you're automatically saying if you have a hit point factor of less than 1 when you're rolling up, it's just what happens. If you're rolling a character with 1 hit point, and your stamina is a 3, which is minus 3 hit points, your character is stillborn. You're dead.
Yep.
So do you think this is actually programmed into the MCC character generator on Purple Sorcerer? Is there any discussion of that?
I haven't heard anything about that. I would guess that would be a piece of code that would be off to the side that, I don't know.
I can't code, so I don't.
John would want to do that. Yeah, that would be kind of a pain because it's going to be such the exception. You have to have this circumstance and this circumstance in order for it to happen.
I'll use this point to discuss that if you don't know already, you can generate 0 level characters on purplesorcerer.com. So if you haven't seen that post and you're looking to play this weekend and you want some characters, go spit a whole bunch out. They look really nifty.
Don't keep trying to make 18s because you're going to be there all day.
All day. I think I could have used a few more professions rather than just hunter and gatherer. And maybe this is something that's going to be, there'll be room for this in zines and blog posts. The book itself expects that PCs are coming from a Neolithic society, so maybe that's why it's just hunter and gatherer. But I think there's some other professions available. But then again, you also have your genotype, your mutant appearances. There's some other options for your character. It's not like DCC where you have 100 occupations and you need all those occupations. There's some other swingy parts to this, but for me, I can use a few more of those occupations.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that people will retcon it over time. I know that for DCC, there are a profession list for modern teenagers, for instance, or what have you. People are making those all the time. I think people will definitely do that with this as well.
One last thing I enjoyed in this section I want to discuss is the additional beginning equipment list and how the weapons, they throw the weird dice in right away. Stone axes do 1d7 damage. Wooden clubs do 1d5 damage. I like that we're invoking those dice off the bat because we need to train gamers who are coming into DCC and MCC that those dice are normal and not just to be used for those quirky, silly times. I think it was, I was listening to the last, as of right now when I'm recording this, the very latest Spellburn discussing favorite dice. They had that survey, and I think the D7 was either the most D7 won. And when I show D7s to players who don't play DCC, they're like, I don't get it. It's like, that's why you need to play DCC, so you do get it.
I can attest to this too, because when we did the character generation, we came up with those with D5 and D7, and the guy who'd never played before, he was fascinated. I said, oh, you get right down to D7 for your stone axe, and he said, there's such a thing? He said, do I roll a D6 plus 1? I said, no, there's a real D7. Here it is. And he was fascinated.
This is why it's important to train your children young. All 3 of my kids don't know why it's weird that there's a D7. They don't know anything but there being a D5, a D7, a D30. That's just normal to them. So you have to train them young. The very last thing, I'm going to point this out for you guys who don't know this or didn't notice this. The armor that's listed in the game, the fur cloak, the hide armor, the leather shield, there is a fumble die for this. Now, DCC fans may know that if you wear armor, your fumble die increases. If you are unarmored, your fumble die is a D4. If you're wearing leather armor, it's a D8. If you're wearing hide armor, I think it's a D12. Scale mail, D12. But it's another one of those pieces that's just not as clear in the armor section. There is a fumble die for these armor types, and it's on page 119. And then I should note artifact armor, I think it's a D16. as the fumble die.
I think one of them might be a D20.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I think one of the powered assault armor or something like that might be a D20. I could be wrong.
And rightly so.
Yeah, heaven forbid that you should get empowered armor and fall.
Let's dig into Chapter 2, and this is character classes, and we want to offer a disclaimer. This is a quick summary of our initial thoughts on MCC. However, we're going to have, in the future, we're going to have some additional Glowburn shows that just dig into these character classes in more detail. So if you really want to know all the ins and outs of how we feel about playing with the Mutant class or the Plantian or the Rover, those shows are coming, and you need to keep tuning in month over month. But for now, we're just going to go into just our first thoughts. And I know I mentioned and invoked the art earlier on. I'm going to do the same thing again. I love the character class specific art. And DCC had this. And the fact that MCC has this is just another great example of using art as a role-playing tool. Each piece of art, from the Sentinel's art to the art for the Shaman, the art for the Rover, I felt like each of these art pieces kind of told you what your character's role was going to be in the game, just as much as the paragraphs that describe what the character's abilities are. You know, the Rover is sitting there playing around with opening a door, but the Rover is dressed in a more primitive outfit. You look at the art for the healer is healing, but they're in a really cool room that's a really well-described area that has all these cool little, herbs and fruits, and in the background there is the weird post-apocalyptic jungle behind them. I like that. I like that I don't just need to read it. I can visualize it right there and go through it.
And one thing, the humanities major in me just is in awe at the variety there. And I don't just mean the variety of the art styles from the different artists. I mean, that's kind of a given. But the variety of background elements that you could pull into your specific campaign. Man, if you took all the art and you crammed all the elements into one campaign, it would be a total mess. But you could take elements from each of those and create your own campaign, or you could base it around I'm talking just like the background accoutrements and such, not necessarily the characters themselves, although they are compelling. You know, some of them look more technologically advanced, others look really primitive. It's just kind of fascinating to me, the mix there.
They look both. I'm just noticing this now. I have looked at this piece of art on page 27 at least a dozen times. I am just noticing that the woman in this is scanning the inside bones of the guy's leg. Yep. I never noticed that, and because there's so much else going on in this art that I didn't notice that.
Well, and the thing is, it's subsumed in that. Gosh, I don't even know how to put it. I mean, yeah, you don't notice it because they're not surrounded by metal objects and concrete, right?
Right.
I mean, this is some kind of a bamboo hut or something like that. Actually looks like it's made of sticks, and yet this object kind of fits right in there. But in other ones, if you look at for example, the art for hold on a second here, for the Rover, you look at that art and they're around, this is on page 29, it looks like they're trying to crack a safe or something, but it's wires everywhere, metal everywhere. Yes, they're primitive, but their surroundings are very high-tech and clean and sleek. And just contrasting those two gives you two wildly different possibilities for a campaign setting.
I could see myself printing out each of these and having them at the table, so when someone plays a character, like, what is this character? Well, it's just as important as you to read the character description, but it's just as important for you to actually look and take a look at the art here. This will tell you a lot about what you're going to be doing in this game.
Right. Agreed.
The last thing I want to bring up, and just my quick look through the character classes, is the Rover's artifact doors and security systems ability. So when I first looked at the Rover, I will be completely honest. I'm like, this is an underpowered class. I would never play a Rover, ever. Which was disappointing to me because when I first heard about what the classes were going to be described, what they're going to be, I felt like, well, the rover's who I would want to be. I'd prefer to be a pure strain human, and I'd want to be a rover.
Mm-hmm.
Something to think about. Number one, the rover has a bunch of other things that are benefits for them. They're humans, so they interface with AI recognition easier. They generate luck faster. The other thing is that artifact doors skill, it's almost like a single all-in-one thief skill.
Mm-hmm.
It reads as rovers have a knack for circumventing the technology of the ancients, especially when it comes to computer locked doors and secured containers. Being quite stealthy individuals, rovers have increased chances of remaining undetected by ancient security systems or even other mutants. So I would say this is a stealth role as well. So it's not just opening doors, but it's move silently, hide in shadows. It's an all-in-one. And I would go a step further is, although the book doesn't clearly state this, and I'll take your take on this, Judge Forrest, but I would allow, given the circumstance, the player to bring in their attribute bonus to this, depending on what it is. If it's stealth, I'd let them use agility. And if it was opening a door, I would let them use intelligence. What do you think?
Yeah, I would do the same. I absolutely would do the same.
We agree.
Yeah, we agreed on something. Look at that.
This is a bad show. This is a bad show. We're agreeing on way too much.
Boring. No, I agree with you. And I honestly, that's one thing I like about this rule set. It tends to simplify things in kind of I hate to use that term old school because I don't want to offend anybody who's new to the game. But really in an old school way, it really keeps things very simple rather than adding layers and layers and layers of complexity. And that's just one good example of that, where you're right, it is kind of like a thieves skill set all rolled into one that could be modified by different attributes.
I'm going to use a different term than old school. And actually, this is something I keep struggling with on my Oris Rebellion blog, because I actually don't like the term old school that much. I think it causes people to think of some of these games as art pieces, or they're great for the shelf, but you'd never play with it.
Right.
I would say that the Rover, the Sentinel, all these classes are an example of something that's maybe clean and designed for you to look at it and try to be intuitive in how you're playing it. What makes sense for you playing it at the table? Do you need to have 7 pages for the Rover class, or can you get it done with this 1 page and the art associated with it, which I think you can.
Yeah, and I like that word intuitive. That's very good. Very good.
What are your thoughts on classes, Forrest?
Well, I prefer rovers, but then I play thieves at every chance I get.
Me too. I love thieves. Thieves and wizards.
I found, that's usually my two choices.
Why are we agreed so much? This is bad, guys. Look, listen, listeners. This is a sign of the apocalypse that Judge Forrest and I are in agreement on this episode.
Well, just bring up the name Tina Turner or Tweaky, and we can agree. We don't need another hero. No, we don't. Now, shamans, I find shamans really interesting. At first, I looked at it and I saw that their wetware programs are pretty limited in number. And I thought, oh, well, that's kind of like a dumbed down wizard. What's the point of that? But then, if you look at the shaman abilities, they get some perks with artifacts, with their Darwinian luck, the AI recognition, and I think those things can play pretty heavily into how you role play that character. I like the fact actually that they're limited. They don't have as much of breadth as the wizards in DCC, but given those extra benefits, those I guess you could call them minor benefits, I like that a lot actually.
Keep in mind that a wizard in DCC is going to have a lot of innate powers to cast a lot of spells that are like Fireball, Magic Missile,
Right.
Magic Shield. The Shaman, like all MCC characters, is going to be lugging around potentially a laser sword and flame grenades and all sorts of other swag,
hardware,
post-apocalyptic gear that they will have at their disposal, which I think I want to get into later when we discuss, at some point we'll discuss the artifacts, my take on artifacts. But keep that in mind when you're reading these characters. I know the game itself does say how DCC and MCC are interchangeable, but interchangeable doesn't mean, in my mind, a complete pound-for-pound balance. If you are a GM running MCC characters in a DCC adventure, and you aren't giving me opportunity to interact with AI, and you're not giving me any artifacts, then no, it's not going to be balanced. You're taking things away that these characters do need to interact with features from the MCC game.
Well, and the other thing about that, too, is that those artifacts are usable typically by any class.
Yep.
Yes, a wizard can cast a fireball, but anybody can throw a grenade.
Absolutely.
Healers in the Holy Medicinal Order. I have to see how this works in practice. It's not something you have to worry about until the healer is 4th level. I don't know, though, if I can see a healer traveling with a high-level party and not participating in combat at all, which is one of the one of the requirements of the Holy Medicinal Order. So I don't know. I'm curious to see how that works. I'm not too worried about it, but I'd be interested to know what other people's take on that is. 4th level healer, if they decide to become part of the Holy Medicinal Order, do they retire, or do they continue with the party? Because again, it's not like a cleric where they can still fight and heal. These ones only heal and they don't fight if they're part of the Holy Medicinal Order. So anyway, I'm just kind of curious to see how that works.
I clicked over to that real quick. It says that they must forswear to forever give up all martial arts in combat.
Yes.
But I guess the question at that point would be, would they still do it and just keep it hidden? Or, I mean, there's some role-playing elements to playing one of those.
Yeah, and again, I'm just curious to see how that plays out and how different people play that out in their campaigns. Because again, you don't have the strictures of alignment either.
Right.
Which, frankly, I like. I am not a fan of alignment in any system, to be quite deadly honest with you. I just don't like it because humans aren't like that. Humans aren't so tied into a box.
And I do like it, so we don't agree. The world is saved.
Oh, I was worried there for a minute. And at a later point, we'll look at archaic alignments, in which case we can go on and on and on about that stuff too. So that will be an interesting discussion when we get there. But for now, I'm just curious to see what happens with the healers in the Holy Medicinal Order there. It's a rare thing. It's not going to happen that often. It's going to be rare that anybody even makes it to 4th level alive. But if it does, I'm curious to see how people would handle that.
I do see the healer. When I read through the healer, unlike the cleric from DCC, I always still see clerics from my very first reading of what a cleric was from the old red box D&D. It's like a holy warrior. My first envision of a cleric was what I would eventually see the paladin to be. Okay. Yes, you can't draw blood. You have this. You have a mace instead of a sword, but you're still facing your enemies. I see the healer as being probably one of those character classes that in your party, unless things went really poorly, I can see the healer as being one of the class that may survive longer in a campaign, because there's not a ton about that character except for what they're given with artifacts that's going to make them want to be in the front lines very frequently at all. They will be a backline character. So I could see if someone's going to make it to 4th level in your game, I could see it being the healer.
True. Very true. Yep. So Chapter 3, Mutations. I have already talked a little bit, or maybe a lot, about the scaling of mutations, but even the passive mutations get scaled, which I found interesting as we're rolling up characters. So we had people, burning up luck right from the get-go to try to bump their rolls up on the passive mutation scales. And I'll tell you, it sure can be worth it. The other cool thing that I like is the fact that these can change according to your level. I think that makes for a very dynamic character because you're basically gambling. Your character may or may not get a better result on the table than what was gotten the first time around. Mm-hmm. And so I like the mutability of the mutations quite a bit.
This is one of those places, too. I think a common question that I've seen has been, pure strain humans get to regenerate their luck, but a mutant doesn't. And I think one of the reasons why I feel like it's implied is the fact that they can use their luck to augment what could potentially be a permanent power.
Yes.
The carapace power, for instance, that's permanent. When the mutant makes that roll, if they roll a 20 to 23, their AC increases to +5, and their fort save is a +3.
One of the Plantian I was mentioning earlier in the MCC campaign I'm running, he actually rolled up Carapace and Wings of all things. We were trying to figure that one out. And he burned luck specifically to bump those up the next level. And it worked pretty brilliantly, actually.
There's little balance tweaks that it just doesn't tell you in. I know I'm going back to class for a second, but it may not tell you in class why all those decisions were made the way they were. But it's another one of those things of, I think that's why Judge Jim was saying play the game, try the game out, and see how it plays at your table.
Yeah.
Because, again, every time I read through this, any of my thoughts earlier on of there being some imbalance issues, a lot of them go away.
And it's a really subtle thing. I have to admire Judge Jim for the way that he weaved all these things together. That had to be one heck of an accomplishment to sit and strike that balance. That's not easy. That's not easy to do.
I love how you do have that difference in the durations for mutations. I like the idea of having some mutations that they're always on. Mm-hmm. And they're just permanent, because that's how, in my mind, a lot of mutations are. You just have the claws, and forever you're mutated that way. They're not just always retracting. It's not different every time. When I first read through the 2015 program guide, that's what I thought mutations were. I thought they were just like reskinned spells the first time I went through them. Oh, well, this game, when you cast claws, it's going to be D5 in damage per strike, but next time it might be less. So it makes more sense to have it this way. But on the flip side, you have powers like electrical generation, which is right next to claws. That's why I read it. That it's like a spell. It's something you'll do when it's time to do it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
There were some comments after Mutant Crawl Classics was released. I started seeing some comments on the Facebook group about when's Space Crawl Classics going to be out.
Yeah.
When is Super Crawl Classics going to be out? I think that you've got your superhero Crawl Classics right here. I think X-Men Modern DCC is at your fingertips in this section. If you have any interest in trying a game like that, again, all you gotta do is make every single character a manimal, mutant, or plantient, and have them step out in front of Professor X, and there you go. You've got your own. I may have to run that. You may have your own X-Men campaign just with these rules right here. Just gonna do a couple changes on the way artifacts work, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe there's just the super gear you get from inside the school.
And I'd say that's really true when you get to the mega mutations.
Yes.
I mean, that's
sure.
superheroes there.
All right, moving into combat. Now, a lot of folks coming over to this game from Dungeon Crawl Classics will recognize a lot that's in the combat section. There's a lot that's very similar. There's a lot that's just ported straight over. It's just the same. It's just the same system mechanic with maybe some tweaks to titles and items that are found therein. Again, loving the art as you go through here, and as you read through the sections, piece by piece. I think it's very clear. I think it's fairly clear through here, with the exception, I think we talked about before, of there being some items in errata that need to be included. So we might come back to combat in a later show or discuss some of that errata as it goes in, because this is where like dice steps aren't really, as of right now, aren't really too clearly defined. But if you know what that is, you're going to know how to play it. And dice steps, again, if it's your first time listening to Glowburn and the first time opening MCC in the DCC unit type games in Dungeon Crawl Classics and in Mutant Crawl Classics, the dice steps are D6, or D3, D4, D5, D6, D7, D8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 20, 24, and 30.
Well done.
And there are certain scenarios where you'll move up or down a dice step. So if you're attacking with a one-handed weapon, it's a D20 and you're rolling in your attack roll. But let's say maybe you are going to, I don't know, someone throws sand in your eyes and you're blinded. I can't see. And your GM I'll quick say, okay, make your attack roll, but you're making it at 2 dice steps lower. Instead of rolling a D20 you attack, you're rolling a D14.
Right.
D20 to D16 to D14.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening to this and the errata's not out yet, and you wonder what a dice step is and no one's told you, Judge James just told you.
There you go. Well done.
Some other things I just to point out, I think I mentioned earlier that you're going to find on page 119 that the checks, the fumble checks for armor. Artifact armor is a D16. Primitive hide armor is a D12. Primitive leather armor is a D8. And no armor is a D4.
Powered armor is a D20.
That's
That's on page 118.
Go back a bit. Does it say? Oh, there it is. You're right. And see, I even noticed that. Power armor is a D20. That's correct.
Yikes.
You know, I didn't notice. I'm going back a second. I don't know if this is DCC as well, but back when you're making your special sign, like the thing that your luck bonus is added to, if you have a plus or minus, if it's for fumbles, you're supposed to double that.
Yes.
Is that how DCC is too?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I'm embarrassed to say.
I've never seen that, and it's like, oh, oops, been playing that wrong. If that's the case.
Yeah, no, I saw that, and as we were creating characters, we saw some of those, and I was kind of taken aback by that, which would lead me to believe that it's probably not the same in DCC. I didn't even think to check the book to cross-reference that.
Yeah, I kind of want to go look now. So,
for instance, the Warbot critical hit tables, you double luck modifier on critical hits, or the backup disc. Fumbles double luck modifier on fumbles. So one of my players got that for his character. Was the backup disc was his birth sign, and I did notice it was a double luck modifier on fumbles. And I remember remarking to him, "Wow, that's pretty," because he had a negative on his, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of brutal."
That's cool.
So anyway, yeah, I'd have to research that in the DCC book. I don't have mine handy right now. It's in the other room. Otherwise, I would take a look at that.
So what are your thoughts going through combat?
It's basically DCC combat. I mean, that's the system. The mechanical aspects are pretty much all the same. I did have a couple of things questions that I had. One was on the crit tables. There's no Giants crit table, and that seems like a little bit of an oversight to me, because you're going to have some big mutants because of mutations, right? You're going to have some large mutants. You may have some that are just naturally ginormous. You have a mutant elephant, for example. It's going to be big. And should they get a giant crit table to roll on or not? I would probably integrate the Giants crit table from DCC, but that's just me.
You mean like the giant, like the monster type,
yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. That brutal crit table that you never want to have the DM rolling or the judge rolling against you, that one.
I've never faced off against it. Is it that bad?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's brutal.
The crit table for the robots and artificial life forms looks pretty darn bad. You sure it's not just this one?
I'd have to compare it again.
Like roll a 2, broken arm. Roll a 3, broken leg. Roll a 4, crushed chest.
Yeah, that sounds vaguely familiar.
So maybe that's just...
Maybe is it, yeah.
Maybe it's the same... It's there's a couple things in here that folks are going to notice are kind of taken over from Dungeon Crawl Classics, and rightly so. The work's already there. It's already done for some of these things. It only makes sense that some of the charts and tables are somewhat similar, but with a little bit of reskinning. So I wonder, I'm actually trying to, as I'm talking here, I'm trying to look through and find the crit table for Giants. And I'm at Giants, and that is the case. I knew it looked familiar.
It's the same?
The crit table for Giants and the crit table for robots and artificial life forms, they are the same.
Okay.
With some different words, different flavor text here and there, but technically the same.
Yeah, and I guess my question would be, if you had a player character who happened to be ginormous because of mutations or just the nature of their genetics, would you roll on that same chart, for if they get a crit? I would tend to favor that, but I just like critical hits, so that's probably why. Another quirk that I don't know that I think I like, and not to get too critical, but with fumbles, it states in there that artifact weapons never break due to critical fumbles. And I find that interesting, and not necessarily in a good way. It speaks to the durability of the artifacts. I get that. They're tough. They're meant... I mean, they've lasted thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years. I get that. But it kind of decreases their rarity, and as a result, I think it decreases their value. I kind of like the idea of a player character handling an artifact very gingerly and protecting it because it's a precious resource that won't last forever. I like the fact that something could break on you at any moment, and you need to be very careful with it. But that's a personal decision you'll have to make as a judge at your table. I'll have to see how I handle that in the future.
I think if you're a judge that is frequently giving out gear to your players, and you're careful about, and we might touch on this when we get to artifacts. If you're careful about making sure your players have access to enough artifacts, it's fair to say adding that level might be something fun to tinker with. But if you're stingy, then I wouldn't add it in. I have no problem them not being at risk, because as I've played artifacts so far, as we've been playing the games and playing the 0 level funnels, I've found other ways to damage the artifacts in my games from when other things happen. So,
and you have to keep in mind the charges too, that they aren't,
Right.
unless you have a U cell, they're not going to last forever.
Correct. So that's, because otherwise, I mean, if you figure you're going to fumble, you don't mean on any fumble. You mean if the result means weapon breaks.
Broken
correct?
Weapon, yes, correct.
I gotcha.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking you're meaning whenever you roll a 1, the thing breaks. But
No.
that's
Just if you roll on the fumble chart and it says that it should break, the rules state the artifact weapons never break due to critical fumbles.
Gotcha.
And I just
Gotcha.
don't know if I agree with that, but that's just me being curmudgeonly.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a curmudgeon.
You are.
Well,
I agree.
We're agreeing.
I agree. We agree. Back to the end of the world.
All right. So thanks for listening to our first 4-chapter analysis of the MCC Core Rulebook. We'll be continuing chapters 5 through the end, including optional rules, Appendix M, and so forth in our next episode. And we appreciate your patience on this. We don't want to take all day and all night of your time to do this, so we want to give you some time also to think about any other questions that you might have about what we've discussed earlier or what we're going to discuss in our upcoming episode.
Mutagenesis.
Welcome to the Mutagenesis. This is the section of the show where we take something from media or another game system, take a stab at converting them for MCC RPG use. James, what do you have for us today?
All right, so I may have gone a little far with this one, but the notes that I have here, as Judge Forrest said, was taking things from media, and I really latched onto media. And about 8 years ago, I watched the movie Marley and Me and read the book Marley and Me, which is by John Grogan, and it's about a man, his wife, his family, and their Labrador retriever.
Aww.
And I made the mistake of, I watched the movie 2 weeks after my Labrador retriever passed away, which had to be put down.
Sorry.
So my wife and I were, it's been a long time. We were a sobbing mess on the couch watching this movie. Well, this year, I lasted 3 weeks and I bought a golden doodle. And my golden doodle, when I was writing the notes I was trying to think of what to do for mutagenesis. I was looking at my dog. And he turns 8 this year, and he's like my best friend. His name's Ridley. He's named after the boss from Metroid. And I love him. I honor him wherever I can. So on Steam, I go by Weirdoodle. And my Dragon Age Mabari was named after him. So to honor him, I'm injecting some Marley and Me, that's where I'm grabbing the media from, into the mutagenesis. And I wanted to have some way that if you were a manimal, a special canine-only manimal table, just in case you want to, whatever manimal you want to make it like man's best friend. So that is what I came up with for this week. And we'll have to put the majority of these in the show notes.
That is extensive.
And then I'm going to put it is. I'll post up my blog too at some point. But canine manimals. So first off, I did throw in some mechanics. And I said, so if you want to make some differentiators, if your player wants to be a canine manimal, the mechanical difference is that they have a terrific sense of smell that effectively allows them to see using their nose. They're never blinded unless both their nose and eyes are impaired. But given the sensitivity of their noses, they are especially susceptible to artifacts or other powers that can be breathed in. Oh, yeah. So canine manimals are -1 die step.
Wow.
There's a die step mechanic for y'all. On fortitude save versus these kinds of attacks. I thought the fact that it's effectively blind sight is decently offset by you're susceptible to airborne attacks.
Yeah, and a full die step, that's a big jump down.
It is. So here's how the canine only table works. I went to the American Kennel Club and I broke up these sections based on the different dog groups. So you take a D30, on a 1 to 3 is a herding group, a 4 to 6 is a hound group, non-sporting, sporting, terrier, toy group, working group, and then I have a section for designer breeds and wild canines. And for each section, you roll a D4. So under non-sporting dogs, you roll a D4, you have bulldog, Dalmatian, poodle, or Shiba Inu. Now, that's just so I could get this thing done and not have it be a giant, barfed out text. But feel free to go and drag every single dog breed from those groups into here, and you could have those included. That'd be great, right?
That's cool. Yeah.
Designer breeds, I got the Cockapoo, which is a Cocker Spaniel Poodle, the Golden Doodle, because they're the best, the Huskamute, the Husky Malamute, and the Puggle, the Pug Beagle. And then for wild canines, I have Wolf, Dingo, Jackal, and Coyote. Now, if you roll a 28 to 30, you get Mutt. And when you roll that, you roll twice and combine the tables. So therefore, you'll roll, and maybe you'll get a Golden Retriever and a Bull Terrier, and you have a Bull Terrier Golden Retriever Mutt. If you roll the Mutt again, you keep going. So you may have 6, 8, 10. It just keeps going on and on and on. And I will also note, I have a Hyper Mutt mechanic in here. Mutts are created with a roll of a 28 to 30 with an additional breed tossed in randomly for each point of luck, negative luck or positive luck modifier. So essentially, if you roll a mutt, you have a bunch of things going on here. And all I could think of was how cool it would be that someone would be a character that was essentially a cross between a coyote and a Dandy Dinmont Terrier. I thought that was
wow,
the most bizarre mix ever. So
that's terrifying.
If you want to be a dog, this is the chart for you. Someone mentioned on Facebook they were really hoping maybe some other options for Manimals, some different mechanics. I'm thinking, man, you're gonna love when this comes out, or maybe not. If you're a cat person, like David Beatty, maybe you're not liking this. I don't know.
So you could be a Cockapoo Golden Doodle Huskamute, that'd be Mutt squared, right? Mutt cubed.
Since whenever you roll a 28 to 30, you have to roll twice, you could essentially never, it's statistically possible to never stop rolling until the day you die.
You have to create a family tree for your dog.
It's true.
Wow.
It's true.
That's complicated.
Forrest, what do you got?
So I am also being inspired by media this time around, two pieces of media in particular. One is, if you look at your Mutant Crawl Classics rulebook on page 16, there's a piece of art by Russ Nicholson, also known for his great work in the Fiend Folio, for those of you who know the Fiend Folio. And there's a piece of art there, and it looks like there are several manimals surrounding the carcass of some kind of, it looks like maybe a reptilian thing. But it wasn't the manimals or the corpse that struck me. What struck me was the thing sticking out of the corpse. And it reminded me of something, we're going way back here, reminded me of the movie Heavy Metal.
Okay.
And particularly, there's a scene in Heavy Metal where a city's invaded. And this is all heralded by Black Sabbath's song, The Mob Rules. And the bad guys coming in there have these, I call it a spike thrower. And so anyway, I've been waiting about 36 years to stat this thing out because when I was a kid, I thought the spike throwers were just the coolest things ever. So, in brief, the spike thrower is a tech level 3 weapon. Complexity modifier of 2, range of 60, 120, 180, damage is 1d5 per spike. It's powered by a C cell for 100 shots, an F cell for 200, a U cell unlimited, and each ammo clip holds 12 shots. So the spike thrower casts a 2.5 foot long metal spike using a combination of metallastic band technology augmented by weak Gaussian fields. They can be shot in 3 or 6 round bursts. Each spike is rolled for separately, with a cumulative +1 bonus per shot beyond the first successful shot, as the target slows and stumbles from the wounds of the initial hit. So if you get hit by the first one, the next shot is at a +1, the next one after that is at a +2. Or if you are doing a 6 round burst, then you would go to a +3, 4, and 5. So once you get hit by one of these once, it can cause trouble really quickly.
I like it.
Oh, and if you, I tried to make some verisimilitude with the actual movie, and if you watch that, you'll know what I mean when you.
I've seen the movie.
Yeah, somebody gets hit with one of those, and then they start stumbling, and all of a sudden they're full of arrows. The 6-round burst may target 2 separate opponents, but any bonuses gained on the first 3-round burst are lost until a successful hit is made during the second 3rd-round burst. So as you switch targets, you lose your bonuses. The weapon is prized by assassins because it is nearly silent, allowing a high firepower, high lethality sneak attack on assassination targets. Spikes may be coated with poison in order to ensure success in the job, but it is sometimes considered bad form by seasoned assassins. Yes, it's gauche to use poison with those because that's kind of, you're admitting that you're not that good and you have to use poison. Anyway, so the spike thrower, and I believe this is possibly the first weapon I've actually done on Glowburn. I think. I'll have to go back and check. Anyway, 36 years in the making. There you have it. Black Sabbath spike thrower. You can scream Dio all you like as you shoot it.
I like how it effectively is easier to hit the target after the first hit, because so many automatic weapons in role-playing games, if you're firing out bullets, it makes it harder to do those attacks. I know often there's not a lot of incentive for players, especially if their base attacks aren't high, to make all those extra rolls, and they often will just take a single snapshot.
Which makes sense because of recoil. If you've ever fired a semi-automatic or automatic weapon, you do get a recoil pull that pulls you away from the target, but this one wouldn't have that recoil, so I figured, slower target means easier target to hit.
Sure, like it. All right, well, it's time to wrap up the show. In our closing segment, for some announcements, Gen Con 50, pretty much sold out at this point, is August 17th to 20th in Indianapolis. Mucho DCCO and MCCO. Forrest wrote that.
Yes, I did.
It. So you might be there by the time this episode drops. If so, have fun. What I'm really hoping for is, if people are listening to this, maybe there's too much pressure here on Hector while they're driving there. That'd be kind of cool, If you're there by the time this comes out, or if you're there after this comes out, make sure, Forrest won't be there, but I will. And if you are playing DCC, if you're in the Goodman Games DCC Chamber of Awesomeness, I will be running my games every day there from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So I will be in that room with a crazy shirt on, my DCC hat, probably making an absolute fool of myself. I may have a toy lightsaber with me based on some of the games I'm running. I will have props. I will have swag. So if you see me, feel free to come over and say, yo, respectfully. Don't interrupt the game and be high-fiving, but, maybe a little bit.
That's when you hit them with a lightsaber.
That's right. That's why I'm bringing it, to keep all the crazy Glowburn fans off us. So we do want to say congratulations to the Goodman Games contest winners who will be headed to Gen Con, courtesy of Goodman Games. Congrats go to Joan Troyer, Sonny Scott, and DM Gojo himself, Corey Gassman. So, round of applause.
All
awesome.
Right. Looking forward, we have Gamehole Con coming up in November. Registration is open, and the games list is actually up and running. There will be several sessions of Crawling Under a Broken Moon being run. I know that Reed Sanfilippo has been orchestrating that. There will be quite a bit of that. We presume also there will be several more of Mutant Crawl Classics, and I will be running 2 sessions of my Killer of Giants adventure, and go to GameholeCon.com for information on that.
So, how to contact us? On Twitter, we are at Glowburn. Email is glowburnpodcast@gmail.com, and we would love to see more emails. Mm-hmm. I think that the Voices of the Ancient Ones is one of our favorite sections to go through. Mm-hmm. So please have them pour in. You never know if we get inundated, like the famous folks over on Spellburn do. Maybe we could squeeze out an all mailbag special. That'd be really cool.
Our famous cousins.
You can find me at I Live for Crits or at my blog site, which is livingforcrits.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Forrest Aguirre, FORRESTAGUIRRE. That's spelled just like it's pronounced. And my blog is at forrestaguirre.blogspot.com. Still 4 R's, and it is spelled just like it's pronounced.
And for folks who are interested in maybe having more interaction, we do have the Google Plus Glowburn community. So if you come over to Google Plus and you type in Glowburn in the search bar, you will find us very easily and come join up. We're at like 280 people right now strong.
Sounds right.
As of recording. So we'd love to see that be like 280,000. So here's hoping.
I'd like to thank our shaman of intros, outros, and bumpers, Bob the Voice Brinkman, our patron AI of audio-visual engineering, Hector the Missile Cruz, our creative advisors, that's you, the Google Plus community, and our intro and outro song is done by the group Kronos on the Voyager album. The song is called Juno. James, what do you have for parting words?
I think it's time to go turn on Cool World.
And I gotta say, if you listen to fools, the mob rules.
Ariel, Ookla, ride!
Flight of your enemy makes you stronger.
This has been a Hectophonic production.
The gun is good. The gun